Millionaire agreed to marry a plain woman for family duty but froze when he saw her face. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us get back to our main character. The meeting room on the 45th floor of Ward Holdings was quiet except for the ticking of an antique clock. The late afternoon light stretched across the long mahogany table where Ethan Ward stood, shoulders squared, jaw tight, facing the man who had built an empire before him, his grandfather, Richard Ward. The old man's voice was calm but carried the weight of command. "You will marry her, Ethan. That is the only way you will keep this company." Ethan's hands curled at his sides. The words hit harder than any business deal gone wrong. "You cannot be serious," he said, his tone sharp. Richard pushed a slim folder across the table. "Her name is Clara Bennett. She teaches art at a public school in Maine. Modest background, clean record, no scandals. That is exactly what we need for the Ward image right now. A grounded woman, a wife." Ethan flipped the folder open. A single photograph slid out. The woman in the picture had soft brown hair, minimal makeup, a plain cotton dress, and eyes that looked directly at the camera, calm, steady, unpretentious. "Plain," he muttered, a faint smirk touching his lips. "Perfect for the act." His grandfather frowned. "This is not a performance. The shareholders are restless. They want stability. You have 1 month before the board meeting. If you are not married by then, Vincent Hale will take your seat as CEO. You know the clause in the succession plan." Ethan stared at the window, the skyline of Manhattan shimmering beyond the glass like a cage made of light. He had fought for every inch of this position. He would not hand it to Vincent, that snake in an Italian suit who had been circling the company for years. "And if I refuse?" he asked. "Then you will watch everything your father built fall apart?" Richard said simply. Ethan closed the folder with a quiet snap. His heart pounded with a mix of fury and disbelief. Marriage had never been in his plans. He had no patience for romance, no time for pretense, but he knew the stakes. Without the title of CEO, every deal, every late night, every sacrifice would be for nothing. He exhaled slowly and looked at the photograph again. The woman's face was ordinary, maybe even forgettable, but there was something about the calm in her eyes that unsettled him. "When do I meet her?" he asked finally. "Tomorrow morning. My assistant will make the arrangements," his grandfather replied. Ethan nodded once, his jaw tightening. As he turned to leave, Richard's voice softened behind him. "Ethan, I know you think this is just business, but sometimes duty reveals more about who we are than choice ever could." Ethan did not answer. He walked out of the conference room, the sound of his footsteps echoing off marble floors, his mind already calculating the risks and rewards. To him, marriage was just another transaction, a deal to be signed and completed. But deep down, beneath the steel and ambition, a small, unfamiliar pulse of curiosity began to stir. Who was Clara Bennett, really? And why did her steady eyes feel like they were already challenging him from that single photograph? The next morning, the city was waking up under a soft gray sky when Ethan Ward's car stopped in front of a small cafe in downtown Manhattan. He stepped out in a charcoal suit, his expression unreadable, carrying the folder his grandfather had given him. Inside, Clara Bennett waited, sitting at a corner table with a cup of tea she had not touched. Her posture was straight, her hands neatly folded on her lap, her modest blouse and cardigan out of place among the sharp suits and designer dresses surrounding her. When Ethan walked in, heads turned instinctively. He moved like someone who was used to being obeyed, every step confident, measured, distant. Clara looked up as he approached. For a moment, neither spoke. He had expected someone ordinary. But up close, there was something disarmingly calm about her. Something that made her seem completely untouched by his presence or the power that came with his last name. "Miss Bennett," he said, extending his hand. "Mr. Ward," she replied, shaking it firmly. Her voice was soft but steady. "I was told you wanted to meet in person before we sign anything." "Yes," Ethan said, taking the seat opposite her. "I prefer to know the person who is about to become my wife, even if it is just on paper." The word wife hung in the air like a foreign language neither of them understood. Clara met his gaze evenly. "I am not interested in pretending, Mr. Ward. I will agree to this arrangement only under clear conditions." Ethan raised an eyebrow, faintly amused. Conditions? You are negotiating with a billionaire, Miss Bennett. No, she said quietly. I am negotiating with a man. The money does not change what is right. Ethan leaned back, watching her. He had faced boardrooms full of ruthless executives, but few had spoken to him with this kind of composure. Go on, he said. 3 rules, she began. First, I will fulfill my part for the public image, but I expect privacy in return. Second, I will not tolerate disrespect in any form, yours or anyone else's. And third, when the contract ends, I walk away with my dignity intact. No media spectacle, no gossip. Ethan studied her face. No arrogance, no flattery, just conviction. You are very sure of yourself. I have to be, she said, her fingers tightening around her teacup. My father is in the hospital in Maine. The surgery he needs costs $120,000. This deal pays for it. That is the only reason I am here. Her honesty disarmed him more than he wanted to admit. There was no greed in her tone, no desperation, just the practical resolve of someone fighting for family. He nodded slowly. Then it is a transaction. You get your father's operation, and I get stability in the board's eyes. Clara nodded once. Exactly. Nothing more. Ethan reached into his briefcase and pulled out a slim document. Here is the contract. 3 months. You will move into my residence, attend the necessary events, and maintain the public image of a marriage. When the gala ends, we dissolve it quietly. He slid the papers across the table. She read the terms carefully, her lips pressed into a thin line. I agree, she said finally. He passed her a pen. Their hands brushed briefly, and for the smallest second, something like static passed between them, unexpected, unwelcome. She signed, then looked up. Congratulations, Mr. Ward. You have a wife. Ethan gave a humorless smile. And you have your payment. As he stood, Clara said quietly, money can pay for a contract, but not for respect. I hope you understand the difference. He paused, his eyes narrowing, but said nothing. A moment later, he was gone, leaving the faint scent of his cologne behind. Clara sat alone, staring at the signed papers. Her chest felt heavy, but she reminded herself of the reason she had done this. Love had nothing to do with it. It was survival. Outside, Ethan stepped into the cold morning air, adjusting his tie as his driver opened the car door. From the cafe window, Clara watched the black sedan disappear into the traffic. Somewhere inside, beneath her calm surface, she whispered a silent prayer that she had not just made the biggest mistake of her life. Across the city, in the glass tower of Ward Holdings, Ethan stared at the contract on his desk. His reflection in the window looked like a stranger. For the first time in years, he felt an emotion he could not name. Duty, yes. Control, yes. But beneath it, something else. A faint, uninvited curiosity about the woman who had dared to look him in the eye and say no without fear. 3 days later, Clara Bennett stood at the entrance of the Ward penthouse, her small suitcase beside her. The elevator doors opened with a quiet chime, revealing a space that looked more like a modern art museum than a home. Glass walls, steel beams, and a panoramic view of the New York skyline stretched endlessly across the horizon. She took a slow breath, feeling like she had stepped into another world, a world that did not belong to her. Ethan appeared from the hallway, still in his work suit, his tie loosened, his eyes scanning her with that same composed detachment. You are on time, he said simply. I was told punctuality matters to you, Clara replied, her tone polite but firm. He nodded toward the living room. The guest suite is at the end of the hall. That will be your room. My assistant has arranged your wardrobe for upcoming events. You will find everything you need. She followed him silently, her footsteps soft against the marble floor. Every corner of the place gleamed with precision, cold, flawless, almost sterile. When they reached her room, Ethan opened the door and stepped aside. The room was beautiful, decorated in muted gray and gold tones, yet Clara's heart tightened. It did not feel warm. It felt like a cage lined with luxury. Ethan handed her a keycard. This is your access to the residence. The staff has been informed about our arrangement. They will treat you with respect. That will not be necessary, she said quietly. I prefer to handle things myself. He looked at her for a moment, as if studying a puzzle. You really are different, he said finally. Most people would kill for a chance to live here. I am not most people, Mr. Ward, she answered, meeting his gaze. I am only here to finish what we agreed upon. He gave a small, unreadable smile. Very well. Dinner is at 7. The press event is next Thursday. You will need to learn a few formalities. Formalities? How to stand, how to smile, how to make people believe you belong beside me. Clara crossed her arms. I do not need lessons in pretending, Mr. Ward. I have been doing that my whole life. For a heartbeat, silence stretched between them. Then Ethan nodded once and walked away. When the door closed, Clara sat on the edge of the bed, exhaling deeply. Her phone buzzed a message from the hospital. Her father's surgery was scheduled for Friday. She pressed her hand over her chest, whispering a silent thank you. Whatever this arrangement was, it would save him. That had to be enough. Hours later, when she came out for dinner, she found Ethan at the table reading a stack of reports. The table itself could have seated 12, but only 2 places were set. You could have started without me, she said. He glanced up. It is a contract dinner. Appearances matter, remember? She sat across from him. The chef served a delicate plate of seared salmon and vegetables, the aroma rich but unfamiliar. Clara ate quietly, aware of Ethan's subtle glances. You do not talk much, he said. I talk when it means something, she replied. A faint smirk tugged at his lips. Honesty. That is rare. It is also dangerous, she said softly, especially around people who think truth can be bought. Ethan's expression flickered, almost surprised, but he recovered quickly. You have sharp edges for a schoolteacher. You have sharp walls for a man, she replied, and went back to her meal. For a moment he simply watched her, the rhythm of her calm defiance disarming him. No one had ever spoken to him like that, not business partners, not ex-girlfriends, not even board members. After dinner, as she excused herself, Ethan remained at the table, his untouched wineglass reflecting the city lights. Something about her unsettled him. She was not trying to impress him, not seeking power or favor. She was simply herself. And for a man who had built his life on control, that felt oddly dangerous. In her room, Clara stood by the window, gazing out at the glittering skyline. Somewhere below, millions of lives moved in their own rhythm, none aware that a billionaire and a schoolteacher had just signed a contract that would change them both. She touched the wedding band on her finger, a simple silver ring, plain and cold. Just 3 months, she whispered to herself. But even as she said it, a small part of her heart wondered if anything could really stay that simple. The first week in the Ward residence passed in a blur of quiet tension and unspoken boundaries. Every morning, Clara woke before dawn, making her own coffee in the spotless kitchen before Ethan came downstairs. He always appeared the same way, perfectly dressed, tie-centered, face unreadable. They exchanged polite nods like strangers sharing an elevator, 2 people bound by a paper promise. One afternoon, his assistant, Melissa, arrived with racks of designer clothes and a stylist in tow. Mr. Ward asked me to prepare you for next week's charity gala, she explained with a smile that felt too practiced. Clara looked at the glittering gowns, each one more extravagant than the last. These are beautiful, she said softly, but unnecessary. Ethan appeared at the doorway just then, his tone even. It is not unnecessary. The press will be watching. You are representing the Ward family now. You mean pretending to, she said, meeting his eyes. Semantics, he replied. In our world, image is currency. The stylist hesitated awkwardly between them until Clara finally sighed. Fine, just pick something simple. Hours later, as the city lights flickered through the penthouse windows, Ethan walked past her room and paused. Through the half-open door, he caught a glimpse of her standing before a mirror, trying on a pale blue gown. Her hair was pinned loosely, a few strands falling around her face. She adjusted the neckline nervously, unaware he was watching. Something in his chest shifted an unfamiliar tightness that had nothing to do with duty or reputation. He stepped back quietly before she noticed and retreated to his study, scolding himself for even noticing. On the night of the gala, the penthouse was a flurry of motion. Cameras, chauffeurs, assistants, everyone preparing for the appearance of the perfect couple. Clara emerged from her room as the clock struck 7. Ethan turned, and for the first time, words failed him. She was breathtaking. The simple gown she had chosen shimmered softly under the chandelier, her posture graceful, her calm composure unshaken by the noise around her. She looked nothing like the plain woman he had seen in that photograph. You are staring, she said lightly, breaking the silence. Just making sure you are ready for the cameras, he replied, but his voice was lower than usual. In the limousine, neither spoke for several minutes. The city rolled by outside, neon and rain blending into streaks of light. Finally, Clara said quietly, Do you ever get tired of pretending? Ethan glanced at her. Pretending is the only thing that keeps this world running. She turned toward the window. That sounds like a lonely way to live. He did not answer. At the gala, flashes erupted as soon as they stepped onto the red carpet. "Mr. Ward, over here, smile." The reporters shouted questions, and Ethan's hand found hers instinctively. For a moment she stiffened, but when she looked up at him, his expression was calm, protective even. Inside the ballroom, chandeliers glowed above the sea of tuxedos and champagne glasses. Music swelled. Clara stayed close to Ethan, following his lead through introductions and polite conversations. At one point, a woman in a red gown leaned in and whispered, "I have to say, Ethan, your wife is surprisingly elegant. We all thought you would marry one of your models." Clara caught the faintest smirk from the woman and replied before Ethan could. "I am sure beauty is measured differently depending on the mirror." The woman blinked, then forced a laugh and drifted away. Ethan looked down at Clara, a faint trace of admiration in his eyes. "You handled that well." "It was nothing," she said, but the corners of her mouth lifted. Later that night, as the orchestra played softly and the evening wound down, Ethan leaned closer and whispered, "You did good tonight. You made them believe it." "Believe what?" she asked. "That we are real," he said. Clara looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the golden light. "For a moment," she said, "I almost did too." Ethan froze, caught between disbelief and something dangerously close to longing. But before he could speak, the photographers returned, their flashes slicing through the fragile honesty between them. The illusion resumed, and the billionaire who swore he would never feel again found himself watching the woman he had married for convenience with a kind of wonder he could not explain. The morning after the gala, the world had already taken notice. Magazines flashed their photos on front pages with captions calling them the city's most unexpected couple. Ethan skimmed the headlines over coffee, his expression unreadable. Across the table, Clara sat quietly, scrolling through her phone. "You handled yourself well last night," he said finally. "I did what was required," she replied without looking up. He studied her for a long moment. "Required or not, you impressed them." Clara set her phone down. "I was not trying to impress anyone, Mr. Ward. I just wanted to survive the evening." Ethan leaned back in his chair, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "You might find that survival looks good on you." She rolled her eyes and stood. "If you will excuse me, I have to visit my father this weekend." His smirk faded. "The hospital in Maine?" "Yes. The surgery is tomorrow. I plan to be there." Ethan hesitated. "Take the company jet. It will be faster." She blinked in surprise. "That is not necessary." "It is not charity," he said quickly. "It is efficiency. You are my wife, at least on paper. People will notice if you take a bus." Clara gave a small nod. "Thank you." When she left the room, Ethan watched her go, unsettled by the strange tightness in his chest. He told himself it was business. It had to be. The next day, Clara stood by her father's bedside, holding his hand as machines beeped softly around them. He was pale but smiling. "You look different, sweetheart," he whispered. "New York has not changed your heart, has it?" She smiled faintly. "Never." The doctor came in with good news. The surgery was successful. Relief washed through her like sunlight after a long storm. For the first time since the deal began, she allowed herself to breathe. When she returned to the penthouse that evening, Ethan was waiting in the living room, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, a glass of bourbon in hand. "How is he?" asked. "Resting. The doctor said he will recover." "Good?" He nodded, glancing at the clock. "You missed the press follow-up today." "I was with my father," she said calmly. "Would you have preferred I smiled for the cameras instead?" Ethan's jaw tightened, but then he sighed. "No, you did the right thing." She looked at him curiously. That almost sounded like an apology. "Do not get used to it," he said. But there was a flicker of warmth in his tone. A few days later, another test arrived in the form of a televised interview arranged by the foundation. They sat side by side on a studio couch while bright lights burned overhead. The host smiled too brightly as she asked, "Mr. and Mrs. Ward, people say your marriage was sudden. What convinced you she was the one?" Ethan's pause lasted just a second too long, but Clara saved him. She turned to the host and said, "Sometimes you meet someone who challenges the way you see the world." That is what he did. The room went quiet. Even Ethan seemed caught off guard by her sincerity. When the interview ended, he whispered, "You are getting good at this." "Maybe I am just telling the truth," she replied. Later that night, they returned home to a quiet penthouse. The city lights shimmered beyond the windows like distant stars. Clara poured herself tea, and Ethan leaned against the counter watching her. "You did not have to cover for me," he said. "I was fine." "You were frozen," she corrected gently. "There is a difference," he chuckled softly. "You enjoy putting me in my place." "Someone has to," she said, smiling faintly. For the first time, he laughed an unguarded, genuine sound that filled the room. Clara looked up, surprised by how human it made him seem. In that moment, the walls between them thinned. He reached for her cup, their fingers brushed again, and the air felt heavy. She stepped back quickly, her pulse racing. "Good night, Mr. Ward." "Good night, Clara," he said quietly, her name lingering like a secret. When she disappeared down the hall, Ethan exhaled slowly, realizing that the line between duty and desire had started to blur. He told himself it was just admiration, gratitude, maybe curiosity. But deep down, something in him already knew it was much more than that. Over the following weeks, something between Ethan and Clara began to shift. Their conversations grew longer, their silences less sharp. They started to find an unexpected rhythm, one built not on obligation but on quiet understanding. On evenings when Ethan returned late from work, he would find Clara reading by the fireplace, her hair loosely tied, her soft voice filling the room as she read aloud lines from her favorite books. One night he paused by the doorway, listening as she read. Her tone carried warmth that the penthouse had never known. When she looked up and saw him, she smiled faintly. "You look exhausted." "Part of the job," he said, loosening his tie. "You could delegate," she suggested. "You do not have to carry everything alone." He laughed softly. "Delegating is easy. Trusting people to do it right is not." "Then maybe you are not afraid of failure," she said. "Maybe you are afraid of needing someone." He froze at that, the truth of her words cutting deeper than he expected. She returned to her book without another word, but something in him shifted that night. The next morning, Ethan invited her to accompany him to a board meeting luncheon. "It will be boring," he warned. "Perfect," she replied, smiling. "Boring sounds peaceful." At the luncheon, the board members greeted them with forced politeness. Clara stayed composed, answering questions with grace and humor that even Ethan had not anticipated. When one of the directors made a subtle comment about her humble background, she responded with a calm smile. "My background taught me the value of work, sir. Something we all rely on, regardless of how high our offices are." The room fell silent for a beat before soft laughter followed. Even Ethan's stern expression softened into a smile. Afterward, as they left the building, he said quietly, "You have a way of disarming people." "I do not disarm them," she said. "I just remind them we are all human. That is what terrifies them," he murmured, almost to himself. That evening, the two stood on the rooftop terrace overlooking the city. The skyline shimmered under the night sky, and the wind carried a faint chill. Clara pulled her shawl closer around her shoulders. Ethan hesitated, then took off his jacket and placed it over her. "You do not have to," she said softly. "I know," he replied, "but I want to." For a moment, they stood side by side in silence, the hum of the city below them like a distant heartbeat. "Do you ever think about life before all this?" she asked. "Before the company, the money, the headlines?" Ethan looked out over the city. "Sometimes, but I barely remember who I was before it all started. I think I buried that version of myself a long time ago." Clara turned to him. "Maybe you did not bury him. Maybe he is just waiting for you to look back." Her words lingered between them like a soft echo. Ethan met her eyes, and for the first time he did not look away. Later that night, he found himself unable to sleep. He walked through the quiet penthouse, the memory of her voice still in his head. The house no longer felt empty. It felt alive. The next day, while preparing for another foundation event, Melissa approached him privately. "You seem different lately," she said with a knowing look. "Careful, Ethan. People are talking." "Let them talk," he replied without hesitation. Melissa raised an eyebrow. "That is not the Ethan Ward I know. Maybe you never knew me," he said simply and walked away. At the charity event that evening, Ethan and Clara greeted guests side by side. Cameras flashed, but this time their smiles were genuine. They moved as if they belonged in the same frame, their gestures effortlessly in sync. During a brief pause, Clara leaned in and whispered, "For someone who hates pretending, you are starting to look rather comfortable." Ethan smiled, his gaze softening. Maybe that is because it stopped feeling like pretending. The words hung between them, quiet but electric. Neither said another word, but both knew something fundamental had changed. For the first time, the contract no longer felt like a cage. It felt like the beginning of something real, something neither of them had planned and neither could now imagine living without. But just as Ethan and Clara began to find balance, the illusion of peace shattered overnight. One morning, Clara woke to her phone vibrating relentlessly. Notifications flooded the screen, articles, messages, headlines, all screaming the same thing. Her photo, taken before the makeover, was plastered across the tabloids with cruel captions calling her a fraud, a gold digger, a woman who had reinvented herself to trap a billionaire. Ethan was already on the phone in his office when she stormed in, her hands shaking as she held up her phone. "Did you see this?" she demanded. He nodded grimly. "It started an hour ago. Someone leaked your old employment records and photos from the school. They are twisting everything." "Twisting?" she said, her voice breaking. "They are saying I had cosmetic surgery, that I lied about who I am." Ethan's jaw tightened. "We will handle it." "Handle it?" she repeated, disbelief in her tone. "This is my life, Ethan. Those children, that school, they are dragging them into this circus." Before he could respond, Melissa entered, her expression tight. "The board wants a statement by noon. Some of them are suggesting you distance yourself from her, at least until things settle." Clara turned to Ethan, her heart pounding. "Is that what you are going to do? Distance yourself?" He met her gaze, torn between fury and fear. "You know how fragile this company is right now. Every scandal gives Vincent more power." "So I am a scandal now?" she whispered. "After everything, that is what I am to you?" Silence hung between them, heavy and suffocating. Ethan reached for her, but she stepped back. "Do not," she said quietly. "I thought I understood what this was, Ethan, but I cannot stay here and be erased." She left the room before he could stop her. That afternoon, social media turned ruthless. Reporters camped outside the building, shouting her name as she walked out with her small suitcase. The penthouse door closed behind her with a quiet finality that felt like the end of something sacred. Ethan stood by the window, watching her disappear into the crowd below. For the first time, he felt powerless. Vincent arrived unannounced hours later, his smile sharp as a blade. "Bad press travels fast," he said. "You really should have vetted her better. The board is questioning your judgment." Ethan turned slowly. "Did you do this?" Vincent's smile widened. "Business is about control, Ethan. You let emotions cloud yours." "Get out," Ethan said through clenched teeth. "You are finished here." But Vincent only laughed, walking away. Alone again, Ethan poured himself a drink, but it tasted like ash. The penthouse felt colder than ever. On the nightstand, Clara's ring still rested in its box, the one she had left behind. He stared at it for a long time before whispering, "You are not the mistake they think you are. I am." Somewhere across the city, in a small rented apartment, Clara sat by the window with tears in her eyes, the glow of the city lights blurring beyond the glass. She told herself she had done the right thing by leaving, but her heart refused to believe it. Days turned into weeks, and the silence between Ethan and Clara stretched like a wound that refused to heal. The headlines faded, but the damage remained. Ethan buried himself in work, avoiding questions from the board and the press. Yet every decision felt hollow without her presence. One night, while reviewing financial reports, he came across an internal memo from the Carter Foundation, the charity Clara had volunteered with before their marriage. Attached to it was an old report about a medical emergency 3 years ago. Ethan's eyes widened as he read the name of the anonymous blood donor who had saved his grandfather's life after the plane accident. Clara Bennett. The realization hit him like a punch. The woman the world had mocked as a fraud had once saved the very man who had forced him into marriage. She had never said a word. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his chest tightening with guilt and disbelief. He called Melissa immediately. "Find out who leaked the story about Clara," he said. Now, hours later, the truth came back. Vincent had paid a journalist to twist Clara's past, hoping to destroy Ethan's reputation and seize control of the company. Rage and shame surged through him. He stood in front of the mirror in his office, looking at the reflection of a man he no longer respected. "You let her take the fall for your fear," he muttered to himself. The next morning, he walked into the board meeting unannounced. The room fell silent as he entered. Vincent looked up from his seat, feigning surprise. "Ethan, we were just discussing damage control." "Save it," Ethan interrupted. He placed a file on the table. "Here are the proof and transactions linking Vincent Hale to the media leaks that defamed my wife. Effective immediately, he is terminated, and under investigation for corporate misconduct. Murmurs rippled across the table. Vincent's face turned pale. "You cannot do this," he hissed. "Watch me," Ethan said coldly. "And for the record, her name is Clara Ward." Later that day, Ethan stood on a press conference stage, the same platform where their marriage had been questioned. Cameras flashed as he took a steady breath. "I owe the world a correction," he said into the microphone. "Clara Bennett was never a fraud. She is the reason my family is alive today. And she is the reason I have learned that truth needs no makeover." The room fell silent, then erupted into applause. But Ethan barely heard it. He left the stage and headed straight for the only place that mattered. Hours later, Clara sat in the art classroom of a community center, painting quietly with the children she volunteered to teach. The door opened, and she looked up, her brush freezing midair. Ethan stood there, breathless, a small, uncertain smile tugging at his lips. "You found me?" she whispered. "I never stopped looking," he said, stepping closer. "Clara, I am sorry for everything. You did not ruin my life. You reminded me what it means to have one." She looked at him, eyes glistening. "Ethan, I do not belong in your world. Then I will build a new one," he said softly. "One where truth is enough." For a moment neither spoke. Then, as the light from the window spilled across the room, Clara's walls finally broke. She reached for his hand, and the world outside seemed to fade. A year later, the Ward Foundation hosted its biggest event yet, a charity gala dedicated to supporting art programs for underprivileged schools. The ballroom shimmered with warm light, the air alive with laughter and soft music. Guests admired the centerpiece of the evening, a new exhibit titled The Art of Truth, featuring paintings by students from the same small-town school where Clara once taught. At the center of the gallery stood a single framed piece, a watercolor of two hands reaching toward each other, painted by one of Clara's students. Beneath it, a plaque read, "For those brave enough to choose honesty over appearances." Clara moved quietly through the room, her elegant dress simple, her demeanor graceful. Though she was surrounded by the city's elite, she remained unchanged, the same woman who had once walked into a cafe clutching hope instead of ambition. Across the room, Ethan watched her, his heart steady but full. Their eyes met, and the noise of the room seemed to fade. He made his way toward her through the crowd, stopping just a few feet away. "You did this," she said softly. "You built this foundation for them." "We did this," he corrected. "Your strength built the reason for it. I only followed where you led." Clara smiled faintly. "You always did prefer control." "Not anymore," Ethan said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "The first time we stood in front of a crowd like this, everything we said was a lie. Tonight, I want to start with the truth." He opened the box. Inside was a simple silver ring, polished but unadorned, identical to the one she had left behind. No contracts, no clauses, just a promise. The room had fallen silent now. Clara stared at him, her eyes shimmering under the golden light. "Are you sure?" she whispered. "Completely," he said. "Because for the first time in my life, I am not afraid of needing someone." She laughed softly, tears glistening. "You really are a slow learner, Ethan Ward." He smiled. "Maybe, but I finally learned the right lesson." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and the room erupted into gentle applause. Around them, people raised glasses. But for Ethan and Clara, the world had narrowed to a single moment of quiet certainty. Later that night, after the guests had gone, they stood together on the terrace overlooking the city. The skyline glittered beneath the stars, and the faint hum of traffic below filled the silence. Clara leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. "It feels different this time," she said. "Because it is," he replied. "This is not a deal, Clara. It is a life." She looked up at him, smiling through her tears. "And you, Mr. Ward, are finally human." He laughed softly, pulling her closer. "Thanks to you." As the night breeze brushed past them, the lights of New York stretched endlessly into the horizon. A city built on ambition, now holding space for something deeper: truth, redemption, and love. Ethan glanced at the ring on her hand and whispered, "The best contract I ever signed was the one without paper." She smiled. "And the best mistake we ever made was falling in love."